be fucking awesome. You know the words? It's gonna be fucking awesome. This insane. It's gonna be fucking awesome. Yeah!
Hello, everybody. How you doing, Aaron Sparrow?
I was told that this was open bar.
It is. It's the open bar. That's the plan. I've got myself a lovely whiskey iced tea here.
I'm drinking water.
Yeah, no, I've just got an iced tea. No whiskey for me. But I'm really excited to do the show today because we're gonna interview Aaron because we're gonna be getting some people on here to interview. But I had told Aaron a long time ago I wanted him to be my first interview. And there's so many things that I know about Aaron because he and I are simpatico. We've been in cahoots now for probably a decade since we worked together on licensed comic books at Boom Studios for Disney.
2009.
2009. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
15 years.
Something like that. It's crazy. So, but, Aaron has a history before that, of course. And I realize, I know these things in various spatterings and times when I've asked him for information, but I haven't necessarily myself had, the journey from beginning to end, to be able to interview him. I'm actually really excited about this because I feel like I'm totally going to learn a bunch of details of some things. So, and for you guys out there who have any interest in me and my side of things that he'll be talking about, even though I'm sure I'll throw in a little bit of my side here there when he gets to things like that. I did like an invective of my own career, from all the episodes that I do, I try to have them from learn something, learn storytelling, learn how this should be going, as opposed to how it's going, as opposed to just criticizing without the, but if they did it like this, that's very important. So anyway, I have 3 episodes of different bits of my own career, in comics and in geek culture stuff, and you can check that out somewhere in my podcast bit. This is the live stream, so you're gonna have to go into the podcast thing in order to get that because it's not part of the YouTube thing. But without further ado, Aaron, I want to ask you just a couple things. Just to kind of start off about your personal geek heritage. What did you grow up on? For me, it was the Masters of the Universe and the Muppets were my beginning. What was the beginning for you of getting into geek culture type stuff? And what kind of books did you read and media were you digesting as a young person?
So, gosh, probably the first thing that I really got super obsessed with as a kid was, of course, Star Wars, because that was the I didn't really play with Migos. That was a little bit before my time. I knew about them and I'd seen them, and some of the older kids, had them. But I wasn't really into those. It wasn't until the 3 3/4 Star Wars came out that I started to really notice toys and get into movies and kind of obviously I'd seen cartoons, I'd seen all those things.
When did the 3 3/4 Star Wars first come out?
Well, they first started in I think it was so Star Wars came out in 77, and then there was the early bird kit, but they didn't really come out till 88. So I was, or 78. So I wasn't on that
enough to remember that.
No, that was before. Yeah, that was before. Okay. It wasn't until Star Wars had already been out. I didn't see Star Wars originally in theaters. It was a re-release, and I don't know which re-release it was. But okay. I remember my uncle I think it was my uncle took me to see Star Wars, and I was in the theater and I was kind of just standing up. It was a walk-in theater, and I was standing up in the aisle, and the movie started, and I was kind of fidgeting in my seat. It's he read the crawl to me, but I didn't really know what it meant. And then Star Destroyer came out, or Princess Leia's ship came out, and I was kind of oh, what's this? And then that Star Destroyer started coming on the screen, and it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And my uncle said that my mouth fell open, and he's not sure that I closed it the entire movie. I just sat staring at the screen open mouthed and in awe the entire time, and got super caught up in it. And then I kind of it's okay, so I had that experience, and I was wow, that was really cool. I want to see it again. a couple of weeks went by, and we were at the laundromat, and because we didn't have our own washer and dryer, and I was doing that thing that kids do where, you fall and you lay on the ground and you're bored and you're like, why is this so boring? There's nothing for me to do. And I looked under one of the dryers and someone had left a Jawa action figure. And I was like, oh, I know what this is. And I went and I picked it up and was like, this is so cool. I didn't know that they made toys. And the next time I was at like the corner drugstore, they had some Star Wars toys. So I was like, oh,
I've heard this story.
Yeah, I was like, I want these. And so I started collecting the Star Wars figures. And then from there, G.I. Joe came out, in the early 80s, and I got obsessed with G.I. Joe, started reading the comics by Larry Hama. Then the cartoon came out, and I was like, okay, this is different, but I still like it. It's a different take on it. But, the comics were always kind of like my go-to, but I still enjoyed the cartoon. He-Man,
I was
the
going to
Master
ask
of the Universe.
Was your, like, to some degree, my connections to comics kind of did come from toys. Like I love the toys were really what kind of drove me like to be pretty interested in them as characters. Was that like that for you, or were you reading the comics beforehand?
No, I didn't start with G.I. Joe until like I saw the figures and I was like, these are really cool, like these military guys. I bought Flash, the laser rifle trooper, because his backpack kind of looked like a jetpack. He had like cool, like, padded kind of armor, he had a laser rifle. It just seemed like a really cool kind of, Star Warsy type military take for me. And I got a Cobra officer. I bought those with my allowance at a Kmart. It's weird that like you still remember like and I can remember the bin that they were in. It was up by the registers, and they were in like this big wire bin, just all these G.I. Joes thrown in there. And it was like, oh man, I really dig these. I went home and started playing with them. And then I noticed a commercial on TV with really cool animation that was G.I. Joe. And they weren't allowed, you guys that are old enough, you'll remember they weren't allowed back then to advertise toys on television. So Marvel and Hasbro had come up with this really great scheme of they would advertise the comic books on television. And the comic books would always be showing you the toys that were out then. So it'd be, it's a part of the comic book story, but they're advertising the toys.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah. So that was like, I saw it and I was like, I need to get this comic book. And so I went and the first one I ever got, I think it was, I want to say it was issue 14. I know it has Destro on the cover, and it was, Destro and like the APC and like a bunch of guys flying through the air. It's not the best drawn cover, but to me, it looked like the coolest thing ever. So I picked that up, and then and then I missed the next issue. I ended up getting it like a little bit later, but I missed the next issue. And the next issue that I picked up was issue 16, which was called Night Attack. And that's the one that like changed my life. Because so much happens in that one. You've got Dr. Venom, Destro, Baroness, and Cobra Commander, and they're trying to poison all of the money that's coming out of the treasury. They're going to, infect it so that everybody who touches it gets this disease, and they can spread this plague that Dr. Venom has created throughout the entire world. And the G.I. Joe team has to stop them, and it ends up with this big. And there's all this intrigue because Cobra Commander has hired Major Blood to assassinate Destro, and so there's all this interpersonal conflict going on with Cobra. And then at the end, Hawk gets onto the back of the HISS tank as they're trying to escape, and he's fighting with Destro. He beats the crap out of Cobra Commander, who's in the turret, and then he's fighting with Destro on the back of the HISS tank. And Cobra Commander shoots Hawk 3 times, and Hawk falls off into the street. And Cobra escapes, and you don't know if Hawk's gonna live or die. And it was just like I was all in. Like I was just like, yep, doing this for the gonna do this for the rest of my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but I still read Larry Hama's G.I. Joe to this day.
I was going to say, do you think that they hold up and it's worth going back to get those G.I. Joe Hama ones? I saw they're doing a collection.
Yes, it's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it. All those early issues, like, okay, so the first 10 issues, there's some really good stuff in there. There's like issue 6 and 7, which have the October Guard. They kind of set up Springfield, which is the Cobra town. There's some really interesting stuff in there, but it didn't really get good until like 13, 14, after the first year. And they had laid all this groundwork. And then you really got into the intrigue of Cobra. You got Baroness being horribly burned in the Night Attack, trying to save Destro from Major Blood. That's where it really changed. And so once you get into those teen issues up into like the early 20s, that's firing on all cylinders. Definitely holds up.
Yeah, one of my best friends was obsessed with Snake Eyes, and I should say my best friend was obsessed with Storm Shadow. His best friend was obsessed with Snake Eyes, and they would argue over who would kick whose ass,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember my buddy Pat going, Storm Shadow is an actual Asian guy. Clearly, he would be better at karate.
But Snake Eyes is better with every weapon. He's better at everything except the bow.
No, I understand, but I thought that was fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's like that was his basis. Is it's like, look, it's in his DNA.
It's like, come on, are you serious?
And that's such a ridiculous statement. But now you see that playing out in media because it's like in the movie, oh, we have to make Snake Eyes Asian because, you know.
That's the thing for me. Like in this day and age, it's that much funnier.
Yeah,
it's like fucking stupid. Okay, so so what about like in terms? So the Joe comic books were like the first ones that you got into. What did you get into thereafter? What like actually got you reading monthly comics? Into the hobby deeper than, because I had the same thing too with like Savage Dragon was my one book that like got me excited about comics, but then like Marvel Knights is when I started it, or like what was the era where you came in, like like if you could like sum it up.
So I had read I had read some Star Wars comics before I got G.I. Joe, but they were just ones that like my grandmother had bought me, and then like you go to your great grandmother's house and like her neighbor gave me a big box of like Archie digests and like Sugar and Spike that she read and was like, oh, I bet your grandson would like these. And so, it's like I understood the medium of comics, but I wasn't really hooked in until G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe led to Transformers 3, Spider-Man is in Transformers 3. And I was like, oh, I know Spider-Man. I've watched the Spider-Man cartoon. So you start checking out Spider-Man, and then from Spider-Man, like and in G.I. Joe, you're seeing these ads for the X-Men. And I'm like, these X-Men characters look cool. And so I got into the X-Men. I don't remember buying the issue off the rack. I might have got it like in a thrift store or something like that, because I know it was an older issue. But the first X-Men issue I remember getting was it was 2 issues and they were consecutive. And it was the 2-part Rogue has joined the team, Wolverine is getting married, and nobody wants Rogue on the X-Men because she's part of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She worked with Mystique. Everybody's suspicious of her. And by the end of that story, by the way, great Paul Smith art. By the end of that story, Rogue has redeemed herself and proved herself a hero and almost sacrificed herself for Wolverine's bride-to-be. And it's just a really poignant issue. And I was kind of like, man, these X-Men are cool. But it would be a while before I could find a way to pick up X-Men regularly. And then once I did, that got me into the greater Marvel universe. And then by that
time... Was that
time...
Claremont, those issues? Those would be Claremont issues?
Yep, Claremont issues.
I still haven't actually read those stories.
I've got Omnibuy. You can read if you want to hold like a 10-pound book in your lap and
Well, I mean, that's why I didn't read Lord of the... This is like the ongoing joke on the podcast is like, I'm reading Lord of the Rings right now and I'm on chapter 4. And I've always wanted to read the book. I read The Hobbit multiple times as a kid. And like, for me, I was always reading certain things for respect. Like, it's like, I must read this because this is one of the definitive things you need to have read. And I made the mistake of buying all 3 volumes in one combined volume. And it seriously was like a 15-pound book. And it was all gold plated. It was beautiful. But like I like put it in my backpack a couple times and it like my back. So very quickly it just became like an ornament on my shelf that I was ashamed was there because I still hadn't fucking read it.
You're like, I'm a poser. I'm a poser.
Yeah, I'm like,
I haven't read it. I'm so ashamed.
It's like the thickest book on my shelf and I haven't fucking read it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so lame. I finally sold it at a garage sale and now I'm reading it on my phone, But
I'll tell you what, for me, that was Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. I got into those books and I absolutely devoured them up through like, I think book 9. And then that was where I caught up and like the next books hadn't come out yet. And so it was like 1.5 years, 2 years. Book 10 came out. I was all excited. I bought it. I started reading it and I realized that those books are so dense. I had forgotten half of the characters and I had forgotten a lot of the setups. And I was like, okay, then what I'll do is I'll wait till the series is finished. And then Robert Jordan got cancer and Brandon Sanderson had to come in and help him finish it. And I was like, okay, the series is finished now. I can reread it. But every one of those books is like this thick. And I just have not had the time to go back and start over from the beginning to read the whole thing from start to finish, which is what I have.
Like that's the same thing. Like I've been wanting to do Deadwood, but I just haven't been able to like line it up with my girl, like to do it at the time, because I want to watch the whole season again before I watch the movie. Because the movie came out and I haven't watched it because I wanted to like refresh everything. I love the show. It's funny too what you described with like comics, and like that's how they got me in so many ways. You know, my friend got me into Batman, and then you're reading Batman, and you know, there's Robin, and there's Robin is in his own book, and then there's also Teen Titans where Robin's in there, and then Batman's on the Justice League, and then you pick up some Justice League, and then there's Superman, and there's the Flash, and there's before you know it, you're reading all these, and then the same thing happened to me at first when I was reading Deadpool. And I got into the Marvel Knights and the X-Men because of the ads in the back of the book. And there was like sort of a jumping on point clearly that was being advertised in like, you know, one of their little things. And, you know, that was it. And that was how I got into comics too. So
I remember you said that the first comic that you really took notice of though was like Thing 33. That was like
well, my dad, it wasn't Thing 3. I think it was Thing 17 or Thing 27, one of them.
Mm-hmm. Where did you get 33 from?
I don't know. He was fighting the Sphinx on the cover. I like that thing. I would read all of his dialogue. You know, it was interesting. It was more like interesting to me, my like kind of Asperger's ADHD brain. Like I had the cards first as like a 11-year-old, and I liked the idea of hero doing heroic things. I like the idea of them having different powers and different designs. I like the art and all that stuff. So for a long time, it was just something that I was like very aware of, but I didn't partake in because just everything that I had ever read up until that point was always so boring. Like, you know, everything that made me read in school was so fucking boring. You know, I was surprised when I was reading Savage Dragon and I was like, this is lovely. I'm delighted by this. You know, like that was a surprise to be delighted by the story. You know, I was delighted by comedies and, you know, my dad raised me on comedy films, but I wasn't delighted by any of the books that they recommend in school. I feel that much more depressed for my children, like the modern curriculum. It's terrible. So at what point did you decide to go, I'm going to get into the business, like, you know, working on this stuff? And was it always as an editor? Was it always as a writer? Was it like, because Aaron does both, has done both, you know, consistently throughout your career. Has it just kind of gone hand in hand, or like, what's the deal?
Well, it's strange because I started out, like, I really liked to draw when I was a kid. And so, you know, comic books made me want to draw, like, you know, so like I would draw like the Archie characters and things like that. That was like my first comic books. And then, you know, everybody who's of a certain age had Garfield at large. And I really liked the Garfield comic strip. I really liked the Sunday funnies. My grandmother would always like cut them out for me because she got the paper every day. You know, my mom didn't get the paper because my mom wasn't a big reader. You know, she had other priorities. And so, you know, grandma got the paper. And so every day she'd cut like different comic strips out for me. And then when I'd go over there, I'd have this big like tin full of comic strips. And I had a scrapbook and I would, you know, do the glue stick on the back and stick them in there and in order. And, you know, a lot of those comic strips, they had, you know, consecutive stories or things that were like, you know, John would go on a date and the whole week that would be about his date, you know, so it's like, you got to put them in order. And that kind of appealed to my, what I didn't know was my OCD at the time.
Yeah,
and so I started drawing
the card things where you put them all together too. That like in like here's a bigger image and there's all the characters. I remember we did some of those for the Mythic Legions books that we did for Horseman Studios because I was just very fond of that, the image cut together.
You put them all in the 9 panel like you know, sleeve.
There's definitely something to like as well to the teams, you know, like the X-Men Gold team and Blue team. There was something appealing to all the different color coding, and I wish I had like a word to sort of sum up the type of appeal that it is, but you see it in so many video games and so many different places. But you know, these group characters, even like looking at them as cards and seeing them as group titles from Marvel, you know, the Avengers line, the X-Men line, it really definitely added to that world sort of thing and made you want to get into it that much deeper. I feel like.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. Yeah, so I went from there into, getting into some of the Marvel stuff, and then, turn around and all of a sudden we're gearing up towards the 1989 Batman movie, and Batman is everywhere. It's like the summer of Batman. You can't escape Batman. And I'm like, well, I better buy some Batman comics. So I start reading the Batman comics, and then, of course you see Superman, you see Flash, just like you said. And so then all of a sudden you're into DC. So all of a sudden I have this heavy comic book habit. And at the time, my stepdad, like I get introduced to a comic book store. My uncle goes, hey, you like comic books? There's a comic book store. Well, it's a coin store, but they sell comics. It's right next to the place where we buy fish, because there's this big like aquarium store. And he goes, yeah, it's like right next door. And he goes, I'll take you. So we go over there, and I find out that you can buy back issues. I can fill in the gaps. Give me these issues of G.I. Joe that I'm missing. Give me these issues of X-Men. Let me start going backwards in X-Men. Let me go a couple issues backwards in Batman, and so I can kind of catch up on what was happening. And so I start doing that. And I can't even remember where I was getting money at this point. Like I had an allowance, but it was nowhere near like what my comic habit was becoming. And so my stepdad at the time, he's dating my mom, and he's a super cool dude. And he's like, I'm a couple weeks behind on my comics, and he's like, well, I like comics. I'll take you down to pick up your comics. I'll buy your comics for you. Don't worry about it. Being cool. We get there, and the guy at the shop gets out my pull list and adds it up.
I remember this story.
It's like over $150. And so the man who would become my stepdad is like, wow, you've got a pretty serious monkey on your back here. And so he pays for it. God love him, Gary. Just what a fantastic man he is.
Can I just say, and this is like part of how we bonded, in the first place. But like when I decided comics were going to be my profession, I was reading about 300 individual issues a month. Like maybe half of that would be graphic novels, but I was buying like 150 books. It was crazy because there's so many ongoing titles or whatever from the big companies. Like at the time in the late 90s, 2000s, they were publishing easily 50 ongoing whatever. So I'd be reading 30 ongoing series plus mini series. It's just like, and then independent series on top of it. Like, I had like a library of graphic novels that I was going through, and I would just be as soon as I had time studying, like reading shit that I hate, like Crisis on Infinite Earths that I thought was like the most boring comic book I'd ever read in my entire life. What the fuck was going on? I was like, who gives a shit about any of these characters? It was a hard one to get through. But yeah, no, this is very funny. Okay, continue.
Okay, so I'd spent all this time like in junior high. I went from being in private school to like being put into my first public school. I met my friends Mike Watson and Mike Howard, and they were both into comic books as well. So it was like, and they were both into art. So we would sit and we would draw our own comic books. And at the time I was drawing like really goofy stuff. I was doing like Garfield as the Caped Avenger, but very serious superhero stories. And I was like, and now he's going to team up with the X-Men. And, it's like, so we're drawing that sort of stuff, and we're creating our own characters and creating our own universes and working in, drawing like the different characters that we like from the different companies. And so like, at that point I'm really enjoying drawing. And then my friend Mike Watson gets hit by a car and killed on his paper route. And so that was kind of like the end of that. Like the kind of all the stuff that we were.
Your love of drawing was tied to him?
Well, it was largely tied to him. And that came around the same time that my grandmother thought it would be great. Like there was a Marvel artist who I don't even remember who he was. He worked for Marvel. He did some stuff for them. I don't think he was a real big name, but she was like, oh, he's doing a signing at this shop. Aaron likes to draw. He wants to draw comic books. I'll take him. And it'll be really great. He'll make this artist. And that guy discouraged the hell out of me. And so I stopped drawing. Yeah, like it was basically, look, he gave me sound advice. The sound advice was, you don't want to get into comics, kid. Be a dentist or something. There's no money in comics. And in my head, he's smoking a cigarette when he says it. I don't believe he was, but like in my memory, he's like, yeah, you don't want to get into comics, kid. There's no money in it. Yeah, be an accountant. Sound advice. He was trying to help me.
That. The end result is the same. I switched schools, and I had because I learning anatomy and stuff, like, because I wanted to be an artist as well, and I was looking at art schools, and the art teacher at the school that I changed to, he basically wanted me to retake all of the rudimentary art classes and like pass like through these 3 rudimentary art classes. And like the first day of the class, we had a picture and we had to turn it upside down and copy it. And I literally just like looked at him like, I've been doing this shit since I was fucking 4, unprompted, like copying some picture. Like I've done that so many fucking times. Like I'm at another level. I was in all these advanced classes in my other school. How do you hold me back? And he just discouraged the fuck out of me. And I went into computer art and writing instead. So what was the transition into writing like from you from there?
Well, so I stopped drawing like art, and I stopped drawing comics, and it was that 1-2 punch of being discouraged and also losing one of my best friends, who we were creating stuff together, and then my other friend Mike Howard moved away. Like he moved up to his family moved up to the mountains, so it's like I didn't have that group of comic friends anymore, and so I kind of I was still collecting comics, I was still reading them, but I was not going to draw anymore. And then I started taking like drafting classes in school, and I was taking art classes, and a lot of like I had a lot of the same experience that you did, where I had been in private school, and so every level of my academic experience was above, like way above the classes that I ended up getting put in when I transitioned to public school, and so I became very bored, and I became kind of a kid that was known for mischief and being like the class clown. Because I kind of stopped paying attention, because I was like, I've already done all this. I already know all this. And the most excruciating thing in the world for me was listening to kids in public school read when they would make you read out loud. And, the kids could barely read. And this is like at the 7th, 8th grade level. And so I was super tuned out. And what really got me back in is I started to realize that I still wanted to create stories, but I'd been so discouraged by drawing that I'd kind of let my skills lapse. So I was like, well, maybe I can write stories. And around that time, the internet message boards were getting popular, and I met some other comic fans on there, and we started writing our own stories, basically like doing your own like kind of fanfic, but not really with existing characters. With you would create a whole world, like a fantasy world or everything like that, and then each person would come in and take a chapter and kind of put the characters in a perilous situation, and it's like, okay, well, how do you get them out of this? And we were having a lot of fun doing that. And that's around the time that I created some of the characters that'll actually appear in Kneel Before Doomface. So this is my early teens. And so that's always been like in the back of my head, just kind of percolating in different ways. So I kind of like developed a passion for it. Then, I became an adult and went to work and started working at jobs that I absolutely hated, but I always wanted to do something creative. And I kept going back to, I love comics. I collect comics. I want to create comics. But I didn't have any idea how to do it.
How long did it take you before you actually jumped into it?
So I started, I was working in a comic book store.
And I was going to say, were you working in any like comic book adjacent fields?
Yeah, so I was doing the comic book store thing, and through that I met people who were like, well, have you ever been to San Diego Comic-Con? And I was like, no. And so one of the customers gave me passes one year. And from that year forward, I started going every year. I went that first year. By the second year, I was volunteering. By the third year, I was on staff. And I ended up working for San Diego Comic-Con for well over 20 years as part of the registration staff. And through that, I started to meet people in the industry. And then eventually I got a job at Tokyo Pop doing copy editing, because I was recommended that, hey, they're hiring for copy editors at Tokyo Pop. And I was like, oh, well, I'm an English major. I can do that. And so I got in as a copy editor.
Can you define for everybody who might understand what is a copy editor?
Yeah. So for Tokyo Pop, what they did was, and they do it now still, but on a smaller scale. At the time, manga was blowing up. This is the first time that manga was really blowing up in the US. And where, to get at this point, remember, to get anime, you still had to go pay $70 for it at like Suncoast Motion Picture Company in the mall, to get a copy of Ninja Scroll. It was ridiculous. But manga was really starting to catch on, and Tokyo Pop was a company that was getting licenses, bringing manga over, translating it, and putting it out into bookstores. So I got on as a copy editor, which is just basically go through these books, go through the English translation, make sure there's no grammatical errors, make sure there's no spelling errors. That was like the whole job. And actually paid pretty good for, just being a very basic position. But what I started doing is I started recognizing that there were better ways to construct the sentences. There were better ways to get the point across, like that you could do. There was just a more elegant style of writing that you could do, because they were pretty, like, a lot of them were pretty straight translations, and not everything translates over well. So I started just leaving notes and making suggestions, and the editors liked it. And they were like, well, instead of, like, why don't we just give you the translation and have you punch it up for us? Like, just give, so you'll get like the writer credit on it. You'll adapt the script. And so I'd get these really like bare bones kind of Japanese translations, and then just try to not Americanize it in a way to like change the story, or to take away like the cultural aspects or things like that, but just come up with a more elegant way to
understandable.
Yeah, to communicate what the characters are trying to say, make the dialogue natural, make it sound like people talking instead of stilted translation.
To explain for people who might not even like understand, like what Aaron is getting to work with in the first place is something that has just been written by a translator, not anybody who's like a writer. They're sitting there and they're going, well, this is what it says, and then it is often easier for somebody else to do the job of like, well, let's make what it says sound better. Because like, the people are just translating from what it says, and then you got to use kind of a different mind to go and read the things. So that's super cool. So was that your first like job in comics, like with your name on like the book?
Yeah, that was my first job in comics, and I got to work on some really great stuff. I got to work on and I started getting like more and more like I got to work on Battle Royale. And Keith Giffen was coming in and doing the rewrite for that. But I got to be like one of the editors on that, one of the copy editors, and go through each script. And that's like a huge one. And then from there, I started to be given.
I'm a big fan of his Trencher book. I've always thought Trencher was so interesting.
It really was. And the art was, incredible.
The style of it is just, if you've never taken a look at the book, it's Image put it out, called Trencher. One of the more interesting styled comic books I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, no, it's and Keith, obviously he did Justice League International. He's done so many things that he's renowned for. Just an unbelievable talent. So, but like to get to work on something that Keith Giffen was working on, like to me, I was like, oh, this is I've arrived. And then at one point at Tokyo Pop, Carl Potts, who was a famous, Marvel bullpen guy when I first started reading comics, came in and was doing consulting work at Tokyo Pop. And I was like, oh my God, it's Carl Potts, like he's this legendary figure. And there was always a cartoon that like stuck out in my head. It was like someone had done a drawing of him like just sitting at a desk waving. But then the balloon that he gave it was, hi, I'm Carl Potts, who crazy glued my elbow to this desk. And I always thought that was kind of amusing, because it was obviously something that was written just based on the art. And so I mentioned that to him, and I started talking to him, and Carl was great. And he actually introduced me to sake. Like he took us out for Japanese food one night, and bought me the first sake I'd ever had.
Who's sake? Were they nice? Is the male or a female or an other?
No, the Japanese drink.
The Japanese drink. Booze. As you can see, I'm not a lush at the sushi restaurant.
Well, actually, it's funny because I didn't eat sushi until you took me to Katsuya in LA. Like I was like, oh, no texture thing.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. No, I had a hard time with the sushi for a long time. It's so funny. My father was always very butthurt by this. But, I didn't really like start trying food until I was courting my ex-wife, and I was trying to impress her father. And it was like this thing where it was like easy points to try things that I hadn't tried before. Like, they're like, all right, sure. Escargot, no problem. Dad. Like that was my way in. And I remember my dad, like one day he was just sort of like, it's like, oh, sure. Gonna try everything that Paul recommends to you.
You're like, Dad, there's a larger scheme at work here.
Yes, I'm like, Dad, I'm trying to bang his daughter and have him be okay with it.
Like, I don't know if eating escargot is going to do that, but I see where your logic.
I mean, ultimately, it achieved the goal. Like I got there.
And now you have 4 kids. Good job.
Yeah. See, I got
when I met you, you only had 1 kid. That's how long we've been friends.
For a while, that's right. And she's 15. She just turned 15. So there we go. Really? 15. Yeah,
she just followed me on Instagram. Yeah, she just followed. I was like, oh, Logan followed me on Instagram.
She's such a good kid. Aaron had expressed to me at the time, it was very, very sweet, that he cried when he met Logan because it reminded him of innocence. And she is still just sweet, is innocent, wonderful, helps. You know, it's hard with divorce and stuff, but like she's stepped up in a wonderful kind way and is very, very cool and helps us all out and you know, is really just like a great student and such a good kid. I'm proud. All my kids are really good. I'm greatly blessed on that front.
She
I
did.
wanted
She
to
made
say
me.
too,
She made me cry when I met her. Like I met her at New York Comic Con. She was dressed in a Spider-Man costume,
yeah,
and
with
she
little
was just
tails coming
so
out the side.
yeah, little pigtails, and she was so sweet. She had these like big brown eyes, and I'm a sucker for big brown eyes. Like if you want to get me to do something, just send somebody with big soulful brown eyes. I'm an absolute sucker. And she was so sweet and so like Jesse said, like she was just such an innocent little thing, and I walked away, and all of a sudden I was like, do I want a kid? I was like, what is happening to me?
That's so funny. And you know, I wanted to relate, you know, as well to what you were saying about losing your friend and souring with comics, with art. For me, it was music. You know, I think you know that I lost my friend Chris, and you know, I had a lot of survivor's guilt because all my associations of like what I was gonna do and all these things that I was gonna do them with that friend. So it kind of like just killed my vibe for doing it because it just seemed like a part I was arrive at and be sad to be there. Like, you know, I don't want to go to that party. My friend can't make it. Like, you know, reschedule.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reschedule the party.
No,
That's tough.
I mean, I get it. Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard when you kind of like even, you know, like friendships, relationships, when you think that you're going to, you know, you've imagined this future that you're going to have with people, and then they're taken from you. You know, one of the people at Tokyo Pop, I've not talked about this often, but Mark Panizia was an editor at Tokyo Pop. He's one of the nicest guys that I've ever met. I had an absolute blast working with him. I had an absolute blast being friends with him. His wife, Jackie, was one of the most wonderful people.
Well, I remember you connected me with him. He was working at Marvel, right?
Yeah. And so he went on to
That was
Marvel.
when the Blade thing almost happened.
Yeah, he went back to Marvel from Tokyo Pop, and you know, you always think like, and I just loved him and Jackie so much, and you know, we kind of lost touch because he was in New York, I was in California. And we had a couple of, you know, had a while where we didn't talk, and then I found out that Jackie had passed away, and it devastated me because you know, it's like you always think there's going to be enough time. You think, oh, I'll catch up with them soon. I'll catch up with them soon. I'll catch up with them soon. And then something like that happens, and it's just the worst. So yeah, when you make plans with people and you think that, you know, in your head, and you think that, you know, we're going to get together and we're going to have a good time and we'll see each other, and then that's taken from you. It's really it can be really devastating.
Dude, that happened to me with my friend Dane Hall, who used to work with Dan DiDio. That's how I got into DC Comics. He worked at the Home Shopping Network with DiDio, but he was also a big comic book fan. And he and I were going back and forth on a show called Geek Nation, and this is like 15 years ago or something like that. And we would like basically meet every month or two and like kind of rejigger some things, and we were moving things forward. And it had finally gotten to a point where I was kind of like, how come I haven't heard from Dane, kind of thing. And then I found out that he had died in 2 months, dead. Like, it's like crazy. You just, you know, you just like that somebody can just get sick and die and you not find out. Yeah, they got cancer and like they were gone. Blows my mind. So what did you do after Tokyo? Or what did you do, or what did Tokyo Pop transform into as they learned how brilliant Aaron Sparrow was?
Well, Tokyo Pop, it was badly run, as so many of these companies are. Like the people that work there, I would still say it's the best time I've ever had working for a comic book company. The people that were there were absolutely spectacular. It just it was run, as so many of these things are, by guys that stumble kind of backwards into success, and then convince themselves that they are the reason that they are successful, and every decision that they make will be gold. And so they start making
that's like a consistent pattern everywhere. I mean, that I can't really name a situation that isn't that.
Yeah, No, I think that, and maybe that's what it takes to be somebody who goes out and like creates a company and starts doing that sort of thing.
Fools.
Maybe there is a lack of humility in it. I've only worked for a few people that I think have had like some humility, and actually like taken, not thought that they were geniuses when they had a small level of success. None of it really in the comic book industry, except for, I would say, Ape Entertainment. I worked for Brent Irwin and David Hitchcock, and both of those guys are solid, and had a realistic idea of what they were doing and who they were and themselves. But we'll get into that. So at Tokyo Pop, like, it was just a great group of people. I worked with great editors, Paul Morrissey, Bryce Coleman, Rob Tokar, Mark Panizia. Yeah. Yep. All really good guys. Louis Reyes, Jill Freshney, who was the managing editor there. She is just one of the most wonderful people. I've got to catch up with her too. Like, you know, you're reminding me of all the people.
Yeah, I was gonna say all of these people were working at Tokyo Pop at the time.
Mm-hmm. And so cool. It was a great group, but there were several levels of downsizing because the company would overcommit to bad ideas, because the owner was a genius and he was going to do this, and he was one of the first guys that was like, we're going to get into film, all, you know, these properties that we have, we're going to make movies. And so that was like the first disaster. And that was like why when I went to, so I moved from there. I got a job at a toy company called Toy Rocket, and that was pretty good for a couple of years until the owner decided to start cheating on his wife with the eBay girl. And then that
so you were out of comics that whole time that you were at Rocket?
No, I was still working for Tokyo Pop. I was still doing scripts for them. So I was no longer in the office. But the editors liked me well enough that they set me up with work. So I was actually probably doing better because I was making more money and not having to drive into LA a couple times a week to work in the office. So I was doing adaptations. Yeah. So I still had my foot in the door with Tokyo Pop. And then I had been recommended to Ross Ritchie over at Boom by Mark Panizia, who said, like, you know, Aaron Sparrow's a really good guy. He's really creative. You might want to talk to him. And so Ross interviewed me and wanted me to run their Warhammer line. And at the time I was thinking of leaving Tokyo Pop because not Tokyo Pop. I was thinking of leaving Toy Rocket because, you know, the cracks were already starting to show, and I wasn't entirely happy. So I was like, you know, I've always wanted comics.
Warhammer, isn't that what MVP does on his channel?
Yeah,
Warhammer
that's what he
does.
Oh, yeah, so they had just gotten the Warhammer license.
Is that how you guys had bonded?
No, we bonded over
another YouTube channel. He was just in the comics. What up, MVP? Love you.
Yeah, no, MVP's great. Love Max. But so they were like, hey, we want to hire you to do this line of Warhammer comics because we just got the license for it. And then the offer that they made me, I was like, I can't work for that. Like, I'm making so much more money at Toy Rocket. Like, I can't work for that amount of money. And so I think that they maybe interviewed me 2 other times trying to bring me in. Like, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 times total they interviewed me, and each time we couldn't make something happen. And then when the owner of Toy Rocket started cheating on his wife and taking his eye off the prize at the company, and everybody was miserable and everything was falling apart, I reached back out to Boom and I said, like, hey, you know, do you have any positions available? Because I really want to get out of the place that I'm at. And it was like, yeah, actually, you know, can you come in Monday for an interview? And this was on a Friday. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I can. Because it was the last Friday that we were all working before we were getting let go. And then maybe we could be hired back on at Toy Rocket as like on a consultant basis or whatever, because going through a bankruptcy and now he's going through a probable divorce and everything. And so I left that Friday, went in to Boom on Monday, and they interviewed me and they told me, they said, well, we have the Disney license. And Paul Morrissey, who I had worked with at Tokyo Pop, was in charge of the Disney license, but he was leaving. And so they were interviewing me for his position.
Oh, and I remember that there was a changeover between you, like, because I met you, I guess, right at the beginning of the Boom thing to a certain degree, right?
I had been at Boom a week or maybe 2 when you met me.
Yeah, because I remember Paul Morrissey was still there, but it was like his last weekender kind of thing, maybe when I met him.
Yeah, because you met me at Comic-Con and he was working in the office that last weekend and finishing everything up.
Yeah.
And so, so Paul was really unhappy there because Boom was a really toxic work environment. And for some reason, I was foolish enough to believe that I could weather what Paul hadn't. And I was wrong.
Did he warn you beforehand?
Oh, he warned me. Yes, he warned me. Everything that, like, you know, I should be warned about, he told me. And then in the first day, like, I was brought in by the marketing guy, Chip Mosher, and told, by him. I'm the guy that runs everything, so just come to me. And then I was pulled into the managing editor, Matt Gagnon's office, and told exactly the same thing by him. And both of them told me, never go to Mark Waid, the editor-in-chief. Never go to him for anything. And I was like, immediately. And at this point, like, I had great respect for Mark Waid. You know, he was one of my favorite creators. He'd written a brilliant Captain America run that I had loved. He had done Kingdom Come. And Paul really respected him and told me how much he respected him.
I was really honored to work with him at the company. Like, going into Boom, from an outsider who was just a fan, I was like, I'm going to work for Boom Studios. They work with Mark Waid. You know, Mark's a really wonderful comic book writer, and they've got some great people that they're working with. I'm so honored to be in association. I remember the very first time I went to dinner with Boom. As soon as Mark Waid got up from the table and left, the marketing manager for the company begins slandering him at length. And I remember just thinking, I don't want to leave first, because obviously this is what's like, as soon as I leave, this is what this motherfucker does. He just slashed and burned the guy who the whole reason why I had this company had my respect is because of this guy. And I just listened to him get slagged off by the marketing manager for the company for like 5 minutes. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, it really was. And so I realized on that first day, I said, okay, I am sailing between the Scylla and the Charybdis here. And I need to try to make it like right through the middle. And if I could just stay in the middle, maybe I can make this work, because I certainly couldn't go back to Toy Rocket, you know, with the guy that was cheating on his wife and like, you know, basically told his wife, she said, what about the kids?
You needed a new situation.
I needed a new situation. Yeah, he told her, like, I don't give an F about the kids. You know, it's like there was all kinds of horrible things going on there. I couldn't go back there.
By the way, I just want to tell everybody, all my weird wiggling, my back has been a little bit weird. I'm trying to like stay underneath my spine as opposed to like sitting, because the sitting isn't great for my back. So continue, please.
Yeah. So, you know, it's like, and Paul had already told me about his difficulties at Boom, you know, and kind of forewarned me. And I was like, oh, what have I gotten myself into? But, you know, I thought I could make it work. And there was that appeal of working with Mark. And I will say this for all of the criticism that I've had of Mark in recent years. Working with Mark at the time was delightful. And I will always say that I saw Mark do some really magnanimous things. I've seen the very best of Mark Waid, and I think that a lot of us, you know, have seen the very worst of Mark Waid. And at the end of the day, like, it would be nice if he could lean into the best of himself more, I think, because I think
I had a very good experience working with him as well.
And so, so, you know, and I don't think that he deserved the what he was getting from those two, and the way that they were talking about him and bad mouthing him, and just like really awful things, like, you know, just slanderous things, like, oh, you know, this guy, you know, he goes to Thailand and hookers, and, you know, like, it's just like things that, like, this is the worst things that you could say about somebody. And I don't think there's
stuff ever been that wasn't their business too. Was like I was just like, why is that even your business anyway?
Yeah,
like, oh
exactly. Yeah, and it felt like made up, and it just felt, everything there felt like trying to get you on one specific person's side. Like, don't talk to this guy, talk to me. Don't you know, talk to us. But then as soon as that guy left, don't talk to him, talk to me. You know, there was a lot of that. And Boom was actually the first place I ever worked that I saw like actual industry sexism in action.
Oh yeah. So when did you, or I should say, so two-part kind of question. So what were the books that were sort of on the table for you when you walked in on the Disney license, versus what were the books that you tried to bring into the Disney license once you saw what they had?
So when I walked in and they told me we have the Disney license, I said, what does that entail? And they said that entails the Disney standards, which is basically all of the ducks and Mikes. You know, so it's Mickey, it's Minnie, it's Chip and Dale, it's the Big Seven, it's Goofy, it's Donald, all those characters and all the ancillary characters, Clarabelle Cow, you know, and like everybody that you could think of from old shorts and things like that. And then I said, do we have Darkwing Duck? Because I had always had in the back of my head this story idea for Darkwing Duck. that I wanted to do, but I had no idea how to ever, approach it. Like, I could resurrect this property that I loved so much back in the early 90s. And Ross asked me, what is that? Which I thought was weird. I thought it was weird that, like, you guys have the Disney license and you don't know the Disney properties. They're like, we have Disney, Pixar, we have Muppets, and it's like, okay, great. Love the Muppets, love Pixar, love Disney. Can we do Darkwing Duck? And they were like, well, what is that? And I said, oh, it would be perfect for comics. I said, because superhero, and what dominates the Western comic book market is superhero comics. Disney Duck, which fits within your, your Disney fans. And it's now at the point where people who watched it as kids have kids of their own and probably would love to share it. So it's a nice little, trifecta of things that would be successful within
it was a great idea.
Yeah,
I mean, I was told it's based on so many comic book tropes to begin with. I mean, even though ultimately it's based a little bit more on like your, spy kind of narrative, whatever, when you get into the origins of the show. But what it ultimately became was a pretty wonderful Batman parody. And I think
and
you
the Shadow
saw that very,
and yeah,
yeah, the Shadow, everything. But like, but you rightly lead into all that stuff when you released all that stuff and really did that in a great way to make it really that much more appealing to comic book people. So how hard did you have to fight to actually get that to happen? And was that like an additional license? And can you explain real quick to people who don't understand like the idea of like licensing comic books and like what that means and what that entails for somebody like you as an editor?
By the way, Last Sled is in the chat. I'm not sure who that is, but they're posting some really great stuff. So we'll go into some of that. Okay, so when you get a license for something, you have to find out what the license entails. So if you get like the
we should have this.
Yeah, Chris Pratt. Oh yeah.
This is about Chip. Yeah, dude, he's a piece of work, brother. I mean, he really is. And it's like I was you have to understand, Aaron is a very I've always wanted to say this out loud. Aaron is a very loyal and kind, cool co-worker, person to work under, person to work with. He's transparent, he's kind, he's credible. He has the most naturally diverse, including men and women and different racial demographics, any person that I've ever worked with before. And everybody who works with Aaron likes to work with Aaron because he's consistent and wonderful. And there was a moment where boom, after like all these things and this Chip guy, which is why I really freely like lambast him because he fucking deserves it, was actively going after Aaron to like every job, every place he went, trying to discredit him. And I was waiting for a moment where like it would end up like coming out more publicly so I could attack them. And it never did. It was always just this kind of under the surface thing where they kept going after him. But it was very just vicious and shitty. And I have just witnessed that, man. Just shit talk every single person who I've ever seen leave a conversation. And I know he's shit talking me because that's just what he does. And the fact that a marketing manager for a company is behaving in that way, I mean, it's like that should be the person who's like hyping everybody up and be like, he should be deifying Mark Wade so that people like me are adding to the admiration. And like it just was like just so fucking cockamamie, ridiculous, all this stuff that went down with Boom and like afterwards. And the last thing I will say, they were screwing up. They were screwing up in many, many ways. They were rushing out work before it was being approved, and they were getting into all sorts of trouble to no fault of Aaron's, no fault of mine or any of the other collaborating people. It was just them doing what they were doing. And they decided to try to throw Aaron under the bus for every problem that they had. They were like, oh, well, we'll just blame it on Aaron. Well, little did they know that Aaron was very transparent and had a very good working relationship with Disney, as did with everybody else. And within a year, Aaron was working on Disney comics again, but Boom Studios was not. if you want to know what the truth of that matter was. So this was very clear for anybody who was working with Aaron and working inside on all of this to see. It was very unfortunate and disappointing, really, my time working at Boom Studios, because I did go in as a earnest fanboy and professional going, I can do really great work. This is Mark Waid's, baby company. Like, I would love to be by his side and demonstrate what I can do. Mark was very encouraging, very cool to the creative people who worked under him. It was a great working experience on that level. But the infrastructure and the higher ups from Matt Gagnon, who was like the head editor person, and others, and Ross at the tippy top, who was just clearly trying to get into Hollywood, and just like you have to walk before you can run, and they had somebody there in Aaron trying to really trying to make great comic books and putting together a great team that was capable of it. And through scheduling and so many other ridiculous things, they failed at that in a lot of regards, and it was not Aaron's fault in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, Aaron, can you tell us like how to eventually get Darkwing Duck across the plate, and and what you said that they had the Disney standards, but then you also said that they had Muppets and Pixar. So did they already have a plan in place for what they were doing with the Muppets and Pixar as well?
They had everything. So the guy that had put together the deal, Adam Fortier, he had worked at Dreamwave, and then he had gone from Dreamwave over to Boom. I have a lot of respect for Adam Fortier. He is a guy who dreams big, and he aims for the stars, and more often than not, he actually pulls some of them down. So Adam was great. So yeah, they had the license for everything. Like basically we could do anything that Disney owned within like their animation, anything that Pixar did, anything with the Muppets. We just had to get each team that handled those licenses to approve it, because Pixar's approvals were different than Disney standards approvals, and were different than the Muppet team's approvals. But it was all like funneled through our liaison at Disney Publishing, Jesse Post, who's another guy that I absolutely love and love working with, and I've worked with.
Yeah, I love Jesse.
So, Jesse's a great guy. So I say, like, can we do Darkwing Duck? I explain that, and I get told by Ross, that sounds like a nostalgia thing. I don't know that we really want to do that. I don't think there's any money in that. Mickey is where the money is. We can go and we can reprint all these Mickey books in these like prestige kind of graphic novels, and we can sell them to libraries. Well, I didn't say anything at the time because it's like I'm in the interview. I've just been told that I'm going to get the job. But on the way in, I had been listening to NPR, and there was a report about how libraries have no money right now. There's no budget for books. Like, they were just talking about how like everything was really terrible for libraries at the time. And I'm like, interesting. And so already I see them making mistakes. Like as the first week that I'm there and hearing their plans and the way that they want to do things, I'm already seeing some of the mistakes that Tokyo Pop made. And so I'm like, okay, so as a good employee, I have to try to warn them to steer away from the iceberg. So I start doing that subtly at first, and then as I became more frustrated, more dramatically. And I will say, in all fairness to Boom, I became not the easiest person to work with, because I had a clear idea of what it was that we needed to accomplish. The comic books, when you're working on a Pixar book, and this is when Pixar had not had a single flub. Pixar was batting 1,000. Everything they did was
so
cool.
excited to work on that stuff.
And so my philosophy when I came in was, these need to be just as good as Pixar movies. And at the time, the stuff that they were publishing was not, because Paul was dramatically overworked. They launched Jesse Post told me later, when we gave them the license, we built in months of time that they didn't have to pay us yet. And that was all prep time where they could take their money and they could put it into books, making the books and getting out ahead, like maybe like 6 months worth of books to go through the approval process, so that we were always 6 months ahead, so that if there were any hiccups in production, we had time to take care of it and to keep things on track. But Boom got the license, signed the deal, and then immediately announced books that had not been approved or vetted or written yet. So now you only have a 3-month window to get a book written, drawn, inked, colored, lettered, and through approvals at each stage. So Paul was dying.
Yeah, I was gonna say I felt so bad for my artist, Nate Watson on Toy Story, because like after every issue, he would like apologize to me. Because he was like we would call he would talk to me and we would, you know, he loved the scripts and we were so happy with like what we were doing. But like at the end of every issue when I would see them, I'd be like, I got the issue, man. You know, like and he'd be, I'm so sorry, man. And he would just be like, I didn't have enough time to do it as much justice as I wanted to do it. So like, I hate that you're seeing that because like it deserved better, but like I did the best I could on the schedule. And that's never fun, like especially like, you know, it's such a symbiotic relationship, you know, the whole like the convention scene and artists going out and being able to sell their art, and like, you know, when people have to push their art and it's not really the best, it affects everybody, you know, like it's like that Toy Story poster, you know, have already been on somebody's wall forever and maintain the Toy Story fandom that they have, you know, because it was so good. Like it's like things can really last and can really matter for people, and it stinks when it gets rushed and not enough time is put on it when they're willing participants. Like, so I mean, like that's like the worst thing. It's like as we were trying, like, let us do it right.
Yeah. And Paul Morrissey, great editor. I'd worked with him at Tokyo Pop. He had his stuff together, but Paul is a guy that cares about what he's doing, and the way that Boom was like shotgunning everything. And then he had so much pressure. He had so many books that he had to get approved under the gun, under time constraints that no one could handle. He was getting art rejected, you know, notes on things. Everything was falling behind and was becoming late, not through any fault of Paul's, but because of the situation that Boom had put him in. So that's why he was leaving. And so they're bringing me back in to get everything on track. And one of the things they told me that turned out not to be true from the very beginning is they said, when you submit something, Disney has like, it was a week or 2 weeks to come back with notes. If they don't have notes, it's approved, move forward. Like if you don't get any notes, if you don't hear anything. So we did issues of Cars that we never got any notes on. And then like after the books were printed, Disney's coming back and they're like, wait, why are these printed? We haven't approved any of these. And I'm like, well, I was told this. And they're like, no, that's not right. And I was like, well, where were your notes? So Disney was dropping the ball on their end. Despite Jesse,
that's a big differential of communication there.
Yes, it is. So that was like one of the first major snafus that I walked into, and that happens in the industry a lot. Like I've had you know, even Greg Weisman tell, not about Disney but about other things, where he's been told in different situations, if you don't get any notes, we have to keep moving forward. It's approved, go. And then you're 6 months down the line and somebody comes in and goes, wait, I don't like any of this, and you're like, but I've done all this work. So so I come in, Boom has this program. Sorry about that. They've basically decided that Gemstone and Gladstone, the reason that they failed is because they put out Disney comics that nobody cared about or nobody wanted. I don't think that was true. I think the reason that Gemstone or Gladstone or whichever it was that Steve Geppi was running, the reason that line failed is because he was taking money from that comic line and putting it into his family museum. So it was like Robin Peter to pay Paul, is like what I've been told. So you know, people,
which apparently there's a decent amount of that in comics, like
a ton. You and I just worked for a company that does that all the time.
Yeah, money laundering in like DC Comics. I like read about like a few years ago now, and I was sort of surprised to hear. But like, you know, in the early days, there seems to be, and I don't know, maybe it was Marvel, I don't know which company, but it was clearly there was some fugazi kind of things going on, and it seemed like there was money laundering happening.
And there was so much. The other problem in comics is that there's so much nepotism and so many people that are put on things that have no business being put on there. Like one of the things that, you know, when of course the license goes to Boom, David Gerstein, who's very well known for working on Disney comics, submitted some scripts for the books that they wanted to do. Like, here's the scripts, here's the rewrites that I have done on these. If you want to publish these, you know, like I've done this work on them. And I remember Ross saying like, he didn't want David Gerstein doing the books because that was old Gemstone Gladstone guys and they had failed. And he pointed to one page, and I thought it was a pretty good joke, but it's Scrooge talking about how his stock is dropping, like the company's stock is dropping. And he's like, the investors will have me in the stocks if we don't, you know, if we don't correct this. And Ross pointed that as one joke, like, what kid is even going to know what stocks are? You know, I don't want this guy writing it. And then he was like, well, we'll get my wife to write it. She has a gift for dialogue. She does. I think that she's a very talented writer, but not for Disney books. There's a specific type of, you know, sensibility that goes along with Scrooge and goes along with those characters that
I forgot about his wife. I haven't thought about his wife in so long. Is that still his wife?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I hope so. I hope he's not divorced, you know, like I hope that, you know, I don't want to see anybody's marriage fail, but I actually have no idea. She wrote a book with Michael J. Nelson, who I love. Michael J. Nelson. She wrote a book.
She did a lot of things with Michael J. Nelson.
Yeah, they did they did Mr. Stuffins, which is a book that I loved. You know, so no diss on her as a writer.
I like Michael J. Nelson.
Yeah, Michael J. Nelson's great. I wonder what he's. Wait, it might just be Michael Nelson. We might be saying Michael J. Nelson because that's the host of Mystery Science Theater. Not the same.
Michael Allen Nelson? Is it Allen Nelson?
Michael Allen Nelson. Yes.
Alan Nelson. Yeah.
That's who we're talking about. That's who we.
I like Michael. I like his writing too. Yeah, we were about Keith DeCandino a little while ago. I like Keith.
I like Keith a lot.
An interesting guy.
Keith has not aged. I saw him recently, and then Joe Corallo sent a picture with him that he took recently, or like just the other night. And Keith has not aged in the time since Boom. Like I don't know, he's got some kind of you know, immortal secret.
When did you finally get like what made him green light Darkwing?
So, I get told no. We end up doing all these Disney books. I'm trying to put out all these fires. I'm trying to get all of these, but like Toy Story was a complete disaster. I can't remember who was writing it at the time, but I remember Chris Moreno was doing the art, and Chris Moreno is a fantastic artist.
Chris is great.
Yeah, and I think he works at Disney now. I think he works there in a pretty important capacity.
You know him through Paul Jenkins, and but he's such a great artist.
Yeah, he's so good, and he was doing such good work. But Boom was paying him a very poor rate, and he had to do so many revisions, and they were rejecting so many things. Like at the time, they had like lost the license with Hasbro for Potato Head because they were in between films, and they had like written the story had been written that was like very Potato Head centric, and so we had to go back and we had to remove Potato Head, and so Chris had to redraw pages, and he didn't get any additional money for the time. It was that first Toy Story book was just absolutely brutal. And so and this is where you come into the story shortly thereafter. So I'm pushing for Darkwing. I really want to do Darkwing. I'm getting stonewalled. I want to do Disney Afternoon stuff because I know it'll be successful. Working on The Incredibles. Wade's writing it, and he brings on Landry Walker, who I love working with. Landry was doing great work. Oh, there's a whole how many episodes do you want to do? Because I can do an entire episode on just each book.
Well, it's funny because I'm gonna we're gonna cut the discussion at some point, but I really do want to talk to you about these things for get as much out of you as we can. I think there's so much to learn from your career and your experiences, and I mean honestly, really this stuff, the inside of like how the sausage is made with some of these things, it helps people to understand the frustrating nature of the business. I used to think that it was just sort of all about being the best writer that I could be. And I set out to be the best possible writer, the best person for the job. And I really believe that I am absolutely one of the best people for the job, or at least I was, to work at Marvel or work at DC. I had studied appropriately, and I was ready and willing to get in there and really offer them the type of thing that would be beneficial to what they were doing. I understood what they were doing, and I was ready to be a help to the business. But because the business isn't really looking for that in any way, shape, or form, it doesn't matter that you are that. I think Aaron is another one of those people who was like, I like this as a hobby. I appreciate these things. I like to understand what is it that I'm working on. Let me understand these things. But the things I do understand that we can put some love into. And but that's not how it's going. It's nepotism, and it's the guy who is drinking with you at the bar. I was driven to drink by comics. No, I started socially drinking at like 28 because I realized that it was holding me back, not being somebody that they could invite to a bar after work to go talk about something, and that so many of the storylines and miniseries
to go hear them badmouth Mark Waid behind his back.
Yeah, there's that too. But so many of the storylines and ideas were actually trickling down from the top. It was coming from editorial in a lot of cases. Like one of the reasons why there's so much good stuff in all of the things that Aaron worked on, despite everything, is that Aaron's a great writer himself. But he's also a great writer who's got respect and and not a big ego, and he's willing to give the space to the people that he works with. But because he's a great writer himself, he can help people who are struggling a little bit or need a little bit of extra help. He can get out of the way and know the people who are going to do a good job and whatever else, and not be somebody who's going to ruffle their feathers. He can really be beneficial and helpful. A lot of the times, the editors are wannabe writers. They're not really people who are good at that part of the thing. And the ideas that they come up with and the ideas that they're assigning and the things that they're pushing for are arbitrary and silly, and they're just just literally like so they can claim it was their idea. Like, that was my idea. Like, yeah, that terrible idea that the people made into a good idea somehow. Like there's really it's very funny. I find it just so mystifying whenever they stumble upon success, the way the system is run. So give it to us. Like, let's start going through. Give us a look at a time. Let us know, let's start Toy Story.
Okay, so Toy Story is on fire, and I don't mean in a good way. I mean it is falling apart.
And what was like a 4-issue miniseries, right?
4-issue miniseries. It almost killed poor Chris Moreno. It definitely almost killed Paul. And so I just came in and batted cleanup on it and managed to get it out the door. It was not good. It was not compelling. It was very bland, because that's what we had to do, basically what we had to do to get it out of the door. It was such a patch job that the writer's original intent, Chris Moreno's intent for his art, none of that came through. But it still sold okay because, it's the first time Pixar had ever done comics, which was another part of the problem. Part of the reason that approvals were taking so long is because Pixar didn't want to do comics. Now, Ross would go into, studios, and he would lay out these Pixar comics that we were doing, and he would say, Pixar handpicked us to do their comic book line. They'd never done comics before. They handpicked us. No, they didn't. A license was given to us. Pixar would have preferred that we didn't do comics, and they had no bandwidth at the time for approving them. So they had to create all that stuff around it.
They basically just got roped in. We've got a license, and you're under Disney now, so now you have a license.
Right. So we're doing that, and it's okay, so now aside from everything else that's on fire, we finished that first mini series. Boom's that sold pretty well. We want another one right behind it. The only two I'm working on 9-10 books at this point, as an editor, a month, with levels of approval on every single stage that I have to submit and wait for, and then respond to, and hope that the response and the changes that they requested get approved. That's another layer of approval, is approving the changes. And if they kick it back again, I have to make changes again. So you can see how quickly these books fall behind in schedule. So I'm doing all of those things. The only book I have that is the shining light of my life is The Muppets by Roger Langridge, because the Muppet team was easiest to work with, and they loved Roger and what Roger did so much that the notes were minor. Boom wants to launch a second Muppet title, which should have been called Muppet Fairy Tales, Muppet Fairy Tale Theater, as we've discussed before. But they want to call it, Muppet Snow White, Muppet King Arthur, Muppet, whatever the title is, Muppet Cinderella, Muppet Peter Pan, where they just do fairy tales with the Muppets. So that's a second title that's going to launch. That one's going to become a little more difficult, and Jesse will come into that story as well. So it's been 2 weeks, maybe 1 week. And I had said when I got hired, listen, I have to be off the week of Comic-Con because I have Comic-Con commitments at San Diego, but I will be there and I can meet with people and, things like that. Once my time at registration is done, the rest of my day is open. I can handle Boom business. By this point, it's gotten out that I am the new editor in charge of the Disney line, that Paul's leaving, and it's been announced that I'm taking over. So all kinds of writers that want Disney work, all kinds of artists that want Disney work now have my name. So I'm at Comic-Con, and writers keep finding me and keep pitching me on stuff, and I keep telling them, like, look, I just got into the position. Everything's on fire right now. Send me a pitch. You know, here's my email. Be back in the office on Monday. I'll start looking over pitches next week. You know, but I can't, like, you know, I can't really give you any information like right now. I'm actively avoiding people because it's like so many people are like trying to get on board because, you know, Disney has such a huge fan base. Pixar has a huge fan base. The Muppets has such a huge fan base. I happen to
they
go
were
by
definitely
the
on the rise too. Boom Studios as like a company, they were on the rise, I think, as well. You know, that announcement of them having that license, that was like, okay, big deal.
And Mark Waid had just started Irredeemable, which was getting them a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So, you know, they were seen as an up and coming company, and it seemed like they were making some good moves. So I happened to go downstairs to the Boom table to drop off some passes to Bryce, who's one of the editors there, Bryce Carlson, a guy that I like, and I'm dropping him off, and he goes, "Oh, hey, there's a guy here who wants to talk to you, and you know, his name's Jesse Snyder." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And so I meet Jesse, and Jesse's like, "Hey, you know, I've worked for Marvel, I've worked for DC. You know, it's you know, Jesse's got a good energy about him, like right away. I kind of like him immediately. You weren't off-putting."
I try not to be.
So
I would always feel so uncomfortable, honestly, like approaching editors at conventions. Generally speaking, it would take me like meeting an editor like 3 times before I would do anything. But I was so convinced that I was the right person for the job to write some Muppets that I was like, I'm just going to go right up to them and I'm going to tell them that I'm the right person for this job.
And you did. So Jesse comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, you know, I'm Jesse Snyder. I've written for Marvel. I've written for DC. Here's a packet of comics that I've worked on. You know, you gave me Dead Romeo and like your Marvel Comics Presents with Deadpool that was drawn by Marco Cicchetto. It's amazing to get like a first time Marvel gig and you get Marco Cicchetto. Like he wasn't the name that he is now, but still.
Gig too. That's the coolest part. Is it was both.
Oh no, that's amazing.
Gig. Yeah,
okay,
he's
so
still a buddy of mine. He's helped me get work and stuff. He's such a sweetheart. I love him. When we met the first time, he was like, "Jesse, take any piece of artwork on my table."
He is very sweet. When I met him at New York and told him that I knew you, he was like, "Oh, it was like we were best friends."
He's so sweet. I love him so much.
So I meet you, and you're very nice. Like I said, I kind of liked you immediately. You had good energy, and you said, hey, I really I love the Muppets. I've spent my whole life loving the Muppets. I really want to do a Muppet project. And I remember I told you, I said, well, Roger's on the main Muppet book. I can't give you that. And I've got like 2, I'm finishing up one book and the other one's already like the Muppet Fairy Tales. We're finishing up one and the next one's already kind of in progress, you know, in development. So I don't have anything to give you right away on the Muppets, but we can definitely talk about that. I said, but what I really need, what I'm dying for right now, is I need a Toy Story pitch for the next Toy Story series. And like you kind of did it. You kind of did this thing where you went for a split second. You like leaned back and you kind of like grabbed your chin, and then you said, "You know, I always thought it would kind of be interesting to do a story where, like, you know, Andy gets a second Buzz Lightyear. Like, you know, when you were a kid and you would get like, you know, you'd have a toy and then like your aunt would give you a toy or something that you already had and you'd have to take it and you'd have to return it, you know." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I get this." And you're like, "But what if like that toy doesn't want to go back and it like takes the original Buzz and it puts him like knocks him out and puts him in the package and he actually gets returned and then the toys have to go rescue him at the toy store." By the way, this is before Toy Story 2 where they did the Toy Story rescue in the movie. I don't think that had come out yet, or it was just being talked about. And like maybe some images were out. I don't remember exactly where it fell in the timeline, but you pitched that, and I was like, "I like that idea. Here's my email address and my phone number. Hit me back next week with your pitch, and I'll see what I can do." And so I walk in Monday morning. That pitch is in my inbox, and I send it up to. I think I gave you a couple of notes. You know, we tweaked a couple of things and sent it off to Pixar. And it gets approved. Probably one of the fastest approvals we ever got. They were like, "Yes, we like this." So
I did it. It was actually very funny because I remember that it had solicited with another writer's name, and then all of a sudden my name was changed in the second solicitation. I was like, "Oh, that is me."
Yeah, because the first one, the first solicitation went out with the previous writer's name, but the previous writer, I think, was, if I recall correctly, was so frustrated with the experience that like we were just sort of assuming that they would that they would do it, or that. But then I had the pitch from you that got approved, and their pitch hadn't been approved, so we switched it up.
Yeah. Pitch approval process is a bitch.
It is. It is. So you got approved, and then you and I remember you came out. You came out to LA, and you were like, "Hey, I'm coming out to LA, and I'd love to get lunch," because you were living in New York at the time.
Yeah,
and,
I remember that lunch.
Yeah, and I was like, "Okay, cool." And so I go out with Jesse. Well, actually, I'm sitting in the bullpen, and then people are like, "Oh, what's on your itinerary today? You know, do you want to go get lunch?" And I was like, "No, I can't. I've got a lunch with Jesse Snyder, who's writing Jesse." I said Jesse Blaze Snyder, who's writing Toy Story, and I can't remember who it was, but someone said, "Jesse Blaze Snyder," and I said, "Yeah, you know him?" And they go, "D. Snyder's son?" And I go, "D. Snyder, like from Twisted Sister?" And they're like, "Yeah, Jesse Blaze Snyder's his son." And I'm like, "No, he's not." And they're like, "Yeah, no, he is." And I'm like, "No." And it's like on to Google, and then I'm like, "Oh crap, he is." I had no idea. And so you got the job on your own merit. I wasn't trying to meet.
That's how I like it. I had called out famously Robert Kirkman on Twitter because I've known him since I was a teenager. He was doing a book called Battle Pope. He was a big Savage Dragon fan like I was. And I made the mistake of telling him who my father was because based on some of the conversation we were having, he had said a couple things that made me think, oh, like he would appreciate that. Like he was into that kind of stuff or whatever. And I didn't think that he was going to like fanboy out on me, but he totally did. And then from that moment on, I hated seeing him at comic conventions because when he was in the room with me, he would just turn to everybody and he would go, "Do you know who his dad is?" And I'd be like, "Motherfucker, clearly, like, like telling everybody that, like I was
because
like,
it changes how people treat you."
Yeah, well, like he wasn't even pro at the time. He was just a fanboy like me at the freaking Eric Larson thing. I was like bonding with him. I was 16, he was like 18, so he was like the cool older kid. Yeah, like but we were like a bunch of dickholes. But then, like, flash forward in the professional scene, I'm like, "You're ruining it, but shut the fuck up." Like,
yeah, so I didn't know. So
yeah, I called him out on Twitter, and he actually responded back to me, and he went, "I did do that, didn't I? I'm sorry. That's lame." I was like, it was lame. Thank you. I appreciate that.
it's so funny. Yeah, because so like I go out to lunch with Jesse, and then like I think I remember where we went to. I think we went to that Coney Island dog place or whatever.
Yeah, I just remember how we were one of those like 1-2 tables. I just remember talking about if we got the chance that we wanted to do a mini series of Mo Duck and Darkwing Duck, and we were going to write it together. And that's how I've been itching to write something with you ever since, because we like the very first meeting, we were like, "Yeah, we'll do that." And I was like, "Yes, I'm into it." And
because I told you what my plan was. I'm trying to like get this Darkwing thing going. And at the time, like I wasn't sure like how it was going to go because I think I
told you it was going to be a big hit.
Yeah, no, you absolutely did. You were like, "Oh, I can't believe it. They're like stonewalling you on that. That's that's gonna be amazing."
Definitely a great hit. Great idea.
Yeah. So we talked about the Toy Story thing. We came up with the like you had the Council of Buzz Lightyears in the pitch. And then we were talking toys, and I remember I said to you, like, "Okay, well, what if the Council of Buzz Lightyears? What if there are a bunch of different ones? Like, when you like go to the toy store and it's like Laser Luge Batman, and like stuff like that." And you were like, "Oh yeah," and so then you started creating all those additional Buzz Lightyears.
I was a Ninja Turtles guy too, and I was always mesmerized by the caveman Leonardo figure. He was like a favorite of mine. It was a really great sculpture. But it was a favorite of mine because I used to look at it in awe of its existence. I was always sort of like, "What the fuck? I have an anthropomorphic turtle caveman." Like it's a weird thing to have an anthropomorphic turtle person, but to have a caveman version of the anthropomorphic turtle, just that much. So writing the caveman Buzz Lightyears into the because they were space toys. Caveman Buzz Lightyear. That was my favorite of all the variants.
See, I really loved Space Cowboy Buzz just because I loved Reach for the Atmosphere. There's a lot of little good bits in there. But so yeah, we worked out some of the story things, but I told you about Darkwing and everything, and we had a really good lunch. And that was when I said to you, I was like, "I didn't know your dad was D. Snyder," and you were like, "Oh yeah," you're like, "I don't like to you know, I don't really like to bring that up because it seems like, you know, don't you know who my dad is? You're like, it seems lame. And I'm like, no, I totally respect it. But then I think I told you, I was like, I actually wrote a piece on your dad once in school when he was fighting with the Parents Music Resource Center, you know, praising his fight against censorship.
I'm so proud.
And I said, what a weird. And I said, what a weird thing, because, you know, if I went back in time and I was like, hey, Aaron, in school, writing this paper about D. Snider, one day you're going to be best friends with his son. And then at some point you'll be at a birthday party and you and D will be standing there cleaning up cups from the party that people have left around. And it's just going to be really a weird life for you. And I would have been like, no, that's not going to happen. That's ridiculous. You know, and then Jesse's going to say that it was catered by tacos.
That's funny. That's funny. I was mortified earlier in my career because, and I mean, this probably will seem like something kind of silly to other people, but like I had my first professional work is for Marvel Comics. I wrote a Deadpool short that Marco Cicchetto did. That was my first professional work. It took 2.5 years for that book to come out. I had been hired to do a Hulk one-shot at that point in time. That took another 2.5 years to come out. And I got hired for the Hulk thing like maybe a year later or something like that. So like 3 years after I'm hired to do my Deadpool, I get hired because I'm a Marvel comic book writer to write the prequel comic book to my dad's horror movie, D. Snider's Strangeland, for Fangoria Comics. That fucking book flies out the freaking system and comes out before my work at Marvel. So now my first published on the stand work is fucking nepotism. You know, seeming nepotism, like, you know, like for like the any person like observing. And I was devastated because like I was just always meant something to me that I'm like, you know, like I was dedicated to not riding my father's coattails. I only got the stupid Fangoria gig because of my Marvel work, and like it just like killed me. So like I was always very like about that part of things. But eventually it definitely came out. So I mean, what the fuck are you gonna do?
Yeah. So but I respected it. I respected the fact, and I never made a big deal about it to people, you know, because it was just kind of like just one of those things, like, oh, what a weird crazy world it is. So yeah, you're working on Toy Story. We're doing great stuff. You bring in Booster from the Buzz Lightyear Star Command. You've got this really cool idea that like, so Andy goes to the toy store, you know, to exchange Buzz. It's the wrong Buzz. It's the Buzz that has Andy written on his foot. Yeah, that great bit with the new Buzz saying like, it's too confusing to have two Buzzes. How about we just call you Sally? It's like,
I don't remember where I got that joke from, but that was somebody else. I think that might have even been my friend Pat. Like that was like a joke he would every now and then of like, I'm calling you Sally. and I was just like, that's the guys that Buzz Lightyear is going to do that to the other Lightyear. I'm like, yeah, Buzz Lightyear would not like that.
We end the first issue with the toys looking up, and Buzz is in, you know, like Andy's asleep and he's got Buzz next to him, and Woody like looks up and realizes that there's no Andy on the bottom of Buzz's foot, and the wrong Buzz has been returned. And then you turn the page, and our Buzz that we all love is waking up in the it wakes up in the toy store in the like twist tied into the package. It's like, no,
dun, dun, dun. Yeah. Classic comic book cliffhanger,
and boom. True to what we become form, bungled it by making it a 0 issue, and you had written it as a #1, and it doesn't make any damn sense as a 0 issue. But the reason that got decided last minute is because Ross said there's like almost no dip in sale. There's dips in sales between 1 and 2, but there's almost none between 0 and 1. So make it a 0 issue. And it's like it was too late to like have you do a legitimate 0 issue. And then
it was so weird, and they set it up like this, like, so we relaunched the series, and I asked very specific, are we doing that 0 issue thing again? And I was told, so this time I wrote a 0 issue. If you read the 4-issue second mini series that we did for Toy Story, you'll notice that the first issue doesn't quite seem like an issue. It's an enjoyable romp, but it's not a first issue. It's like a introduction to the rest of the fucking miniseries, which starts with issue 2, because it was supposed to be a fucking 0 issue. And then they pulled the friggin' carpet out from under me at the last minute. So yeah, thanks a lot. It was a free comic book day edition though, and that definitely went over really good. I was really happy about that. I've like signed so many Toy Story free comic book day editions over the years, and I just like that even like that first issue. I like actually like the first issues are so freaking hard, and because they made us do all the changes that I'm sure you'll get into in a second, you know, as the book went on, the first 2 issues of that book are the best 2 to read.
Yeah.
Then it's getting a little fucked up.
The 3rd issue is really good if you read the singular issue. If you read the trade, nothing is as good as it could be. And then if you read the 4th issue that's singular, it doesn't make any sense because of changes that they made us make that completely break the continuity of the previous 3 issues in singular form. So yeah. So anyway, Andy comes back from the toy store.
Aaron, isn't it just frustrating? It's like, it's one thing if there's no component within your organization that understands the mistake being made. It's another thing, and the mistakes are being made anyway, and we could have saved them.
Yeah, Ryan Wynn. I will get into like all of the ways that Tad Stones influenced the books at Boom, and how great he was in trying to help. I will get into that at some point. But as far as Toy Story goes, so now we're on our 2nd issue, and the 2nd issue has to do with the fact that the new Buzz has the same problem as the old Buzz, where he thinks he's a space ranger. He does seem to have a little bit more of an understanding of the fact, like he knew to swap out the other Buzz and things like that. So on some level, he understands the mechanics of being a toy, but he still like very much believes that he's a space ranger.
It's supposed to be like he's been on this long enough that he started to become cognizantly aware of aspects of what's going on here. Now,
yeah, he's been passed over so many times. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's like, that's why he wasn't going back, because he had been returned multiple times, and we get into why that is. So in the 2nd issue, we're now dealing with Booster, who thinks that he's a space ranger, and Booster is quite funny in the book. And then you've got the toys decide that they're going to steal the mom's car and get to the toy store, and so there's a great sequence of them. They're yelling at Ham because he's like stepping on the gas too hard, and he's like, yeah, well, I'm weighed down with about $8 and change. There's all kinds of like little great Toy Story things. Jesse had written a sequence that was so good, it ended up getting changed. But we had a stand-up routine with Potato Head just roasting the other toys in the toy store, like the Buzz Lightyears. And Jesse had done all this. Yeah, I'll let you get to that in a second. But so that's coming in the 3rd issue, and I know from the pitch that that's coming. And so I say to Jesse, he needs to have a microphone. We need to have Mr. Mike go on the adventure so that Potato Head has a microphone while he's doing his stand-up. And Jesse's like, well, but he's not, like, we don't have him in the 1st issue. Like, he's not in we don't touch on him. So how do we get him in there? And I said, in the 2nd issue, when they get in the car, he's just there. And Jesse goes, well, how do we explain it? And I said, we'll just have a line about like, oh, did they leave you in the car after the birthday party? And he's like, yeah. Mr. Mike's like, yeah. So Mr. Mike gets to go, and it was a fun,
which is fun too, because that adds to the ambiance, little things like that. So often, like when you're shoehorning in, something that would just be visually cool. When you do try to make any sense of it, it always just adds to the world. So I always found that, like, 'cause sometimes my logic would get in the way of like certain things like that. My dad would make some suggestion of like some like bizarre sort of way to do something, but really interesting. And I'd be like, all right, you know what? I am going to do that,
Mm-hmm.
And it goes a long way to embrace it. You were saying?
Yeah, no, it was great. I remember you had Lenny talk. This is like, so this is where Pixar kind of like got off my back in a lot of ways with their notes, because the way that it worked was you were getting approvals from Disney and Burbank. You were getting approvals from Kelly Bonbright and her team at Pixar. And by the way, I just recently discovered that there is a car named Kelly Beambright that actually has a Mattel toy, and that's based on Kelly Bonbright and her work at Pixar. So she actually got her own car character. So I got to reach out to her and tell her how cool that is. And then you also had Disney Milan, which had to approve everything. So sometimes you would get back notes, and the people giving you notes would be fighting with each other about the notes. And so we finally got one, like where I finally had enough is we had Nate drawing Woody, and they were saying Woody's head is too big, it's too large for his torso. And I told Nate that, and Nate said, look, and he took a frame from the movie and he measured it out with Woody's head from the actual film footage, and he had it exactly right. And so I sent that back at the same time I sent back a note where they said, you can't have Lenny, the little pair of binoculars, talk because he doesn't talk. And I said, okay, here's where you're wrong on the art, and here's where you're wrong on this, because not only does Lenny talk at this point in the movie, but he's voiced by your director, Joe Ranft. And at that point, Kelly Bonbright stepped in on her team, and she said, you guys need to stop giving Aaron notes. He knows the property better than you do. And so that was kind of cool. So we stopped getting a lot of those notes. We didn't know the disaster that was coming. So we've got all these alternate buzzes. It's a lot of fun. And then one of the alternate buzzes is Future Buzz, Ambassador Buzz. He's Buzz from the future, and he's got like a long beard and a robe, and it was kind of based off of some very Star Trek kind of stuff. And the idea behind all of these variant buzzes is both the toy company is trying to make more money, and that, which will become a problem in real life, and also that, kind of leaning into Star Trek, where you would have like Ambassador Spock, come and, different, from the future. And
yeah, it was a play on the last episode of The Next Generation. Like you see all of the characters old. So I was trying to think of like, classic finales. So it just seemed like, maybe that episode where we saw old Buzz Lightyear and he got boring.
Yeah. And so he's the one who's like the head of the council of buzzes that are going to decide between the, like the two buzzes now are there, and they have a beef, old Buzz and new Buzz. And the council's going to decide it and decide the fate of Woody and Pam and all the characters that have come along. Also, we had when we had the big toy brawl in the toy store, Potato Head gets pulled apart. And then there's a couple of other there's like a surgeon Potato Head that says, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. So Potato Head later comes back into the story, and he's in Buzz Lightyear armor. He's Spud Lightyear. And he's in, and it's a really fun kind of thing.
It made it into the third issue, right? It's actually drawn into
the third issue. Yeah. It's actually in the physical, like the individual third issue, it's in there. So
we did it first.
We did it first. We did so many things first, and we were told
we were told that we couldn't do so many things. There were so many ideas we had. It was very funny. I love Aaron because like me and Aaron are both very defensive of our friends, and I remember I really liked Toy Story 3 because I saw it as like validation of so many things that I had written. But Aaron like hated it. He's like they told us we couldn't do that. They told us we couldn't do that.
Toy Story 3, yeah. Yeah, because when I watched Toy Story 3, I'm like, it is just a movie filled with things that we were told that we couldn't do, and that are in the movie because it would violate the the canon of the universe.
We could have done them. It would have been great.
It's there in 3. That's also why I have a problem with the DuckTales 2017 cartoon, because they got to do so many things that we were told no on. But when you're doing an animated show, you get better legal access to legal than you do when you're doing worthless comic books.
It's just arbitrary so often, the actual notes that you're getting and the things that are the barriers that are being put up. I mean, it's so silly. We'll get into I just want to wrap up Toy Story tonight, but like we'll get into the Muppets next time we're talking. I mean, something as simple as when I got my notes for the first issue, they told us that they wanted us to put a joke in every panel. Talk about an arbitrary note. Like, no matter what, there's a joke in every panel. I mean, under all circumstances, like I literally could not wrap my head around that note when I first received it, because like the literal part of me was like, you don't really want me to do that, right? And then it became like well, how do I fight against this so that they don't destroy my script by accident? It's really like, it's so crazy.
That was purely because Paul Benjamin and Patrick Stork had done that on Muppet King Arthur, but that one was designed to have a joke in every panel. Like it was set up that way. And your story was not. Your story had some more elegant kind of like really, kind of Muppet style.
Elegant is really the thing. I was thinking about the parents. The main thing that I thought when I read the first 2 Muppet Fairy Tale books was that they were a bit overwhelming if a parent was to try to read it to their kids. And the whole fairy tale aesthetic was just like you were setting up a parent to buy this for a child, kind of thing. This is a way to bond with my kids, get them into characters they're like, and they're all fairy tales. So the idea that they should be elegant and, elegant versions of these fairy tales just seem like it made no sense across the board. So when they came in and went, add a joke to every panel, and I had paced it to be very elegant, as I was mortified. I mean, and there was jokes in it. There was plenty of things.
Yeah, there were plenty of jokes in it. Another reason that you kind of got that note was because Patrick and Paul didn't have a note in every, or didn't have a joke in every panel, but because Silvani drew it, every panel was funny. So in their heads, they were like, every panel in the previous one had a joke in it, and that wasn't necessarily true, but that's the note that we got.
But well, that was literally like. Yeah, in the first issue, the first page, they were like, put some rubber chickens and whoopee cushions in the background.
Well,
because that would be funny.
One of the people we were getting notes from was one of the unfunniest people on the planet. Like I remember in Muppet King Arthur, we had to change a very funny line by Patrick that this guy decided he didn't like, and instead he thought it would be funny if we had Fozzie say, "That takes the cake and the ice cream too."
The person that he's talking about is like one of the worst creative people who I've ever beared witness to. His notes were asinine, to say the least.
He also wrote one of the worst Muppet things ever, but we won't get into that.
Yeah, the movie. It's awful. The movie he did. So what happened with Buzz Lightyear? I mean, Spud Lightyear.
So with Spud Lightyear, so on issue 3, it goes to print. We're doing the 4th issue. Nate's drawing it. We're wrapping it up. It's going to be great. We've got like pathos at the end. We've got that Pixar heart. Everything is going. And then all of a sudden, we have to have this big meeting with Pixar. And I think it was Ben Butcher, who was one of the approval people, but he was the guy that dealt with like the toy companies. And he had not been privy to all of the things that we were doing. And so he got handed these books because but it turns out Mattel had the Toy Story license. They had gotten a hold of the book with all of the variant Buzz Lightyears. They'd been trying to do that toy line kind of thing with the Toy Story characters. Like, why can't we have astronaut Woody? Why can't we have, Ninja Woody? Why can't we do all these like variations? And Ben Butcher had been telling them, no, you can't do it. No, you can't do it. Like, the toys are the toys are the toys, like we don't want them out there in these other forms, in toy form. They'd gotten a hold of the comic books at Mattel, and they had gone to Ben Butcher and said, we just want to make these toys that you've got in the comic book. We want to make these.
That was sort of my my proudest moment in my life, kind of, actually. I was just like, oh my goodness, I've created such a stir. Like, if that is true, and they're like, you can't do we don't want you to do any of this. What we did as a farce, the ridiculous possibilities of fucking like you need to look at the comic book that we did, because if you see the examples of Buzz Lightyear variants that are in the fucking book, you'll see that it's not really meant to be serious.
It's not meant to be cool. It's meant to be like, isn't this ridiculous?
This is stupid. So for them to come in and seriously going like, let us do these. It's really hysterical.
And then Ben sees that Buster is in the book, and he's like, "You can't have Buster in this book. That's like a different property."
Buster's a character from the Buzz Lightyear of Star Command animated series, which we found out through the grapevine John Lasseter apparently hated. And even though Booster in the R book, he's a toy, and he's like, has a certain amount of awareness that he's well, what would we have him? He's just as a Star Cadet, so he doesn't know he's a toy. Yeah. So, but I mean, he's just playing a bit part. He's the freak out kind of character in the show. So he's freaking out, being beat up by the toys in the toy room.
Yeah. And we were gonna write him out before we got to Toy Story 2 continuity, because obviously he can't be in the room. Like, we had a way to write him out. He was going to get adopted by, like, Bonnie was going to take him, and he was going to find out that he liked being one of Bonnie's toys much more, having little tea parties and stuff. So, there wouldn't be any question as to why he was gone. Yeah. So Ben Butcher comes in, and Ben Butcher, great guy, by the way. But he comes in and he's like, hey, you guys have created like this problem, and it's not your fault, but it's a problem. And we're like, well, what is it? And he's like, well, I got the toy companies like demanding to like make these things. And I understand what you're doing with it. I understand it's a farce. And he goes, but you also used Buster. which they should. He goes, no one on the team really knew this. So again, not your fault. But John Lasseter hates that show. And so the fear became that John Lasseter is going to get a hold of these Toy Story comic books and be like, Booster. I called him Buster earlier. I messed that up. He's like, Booster is in this. What? And then people are going to get fired because all of these approval people are afraid for their jobs all the time. And that's why you get told no. That's why legal is always saying no, because if no one ever gets fired for saying no, they only get fired for saying yes. And then if it doesn't work, they get fired. So that's how these things work. You know, you go into a room and you're pitching stuff and everybody's on board until that one guy that says, well, I don't know about this. And you watch the fear spread from him back through all the people who were just on board a second ago. And all of a sudden, everybody's afraid for their job. And that's why these companies can't produce anything good anymore. So
yeah, and that's why nobody trusts their gut, and like, you know, there's no taste leading the way and things like that. It's like people are always just following, because then if they fail, they can blame the fact that they were following. Well, I was just doing what made perfect sense for anybody who's following. Because if you say, oh, this is me and I believe in this, we should do this, like most of the time it's not Aaron Sparrow being absolutely right about Darkwing Duck or whatever. It's Darkwing Duck's a failure, and then they turn to Aaron and he goes, well, it was my idea, and he gets fired.
Yeah.
So people, this tactic of like basically hiding from what's going on, you know, so that they don't have to necessarily be like take the bullet if it goes wrong.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's why good work escapes from these corporations more than it is planned. You need somebody like a John Lasseter who has that vision at the top, who can greenlight things and say, we're doing that. This is what we're doing. And unfortunately, you don't have that level of creative people anymore. And I honestly think that if we had ever gotten a chance to talk to John Lasseter, I think he would have loved what we were doing, because it was very much in the spirit of what he had created. But that's neither here nor there. So everybody's afraid. We get told you can keep the variant buzzes. We'll deal with that. We'll tell them no, it's a farce. If you made them, like, they're making fun of it, you know, and we're not going to have you making things that are part of the joke.
We're clearly making fun of it.
Mm-hmm. And so that part's fine. But for some reason, somebody in approvals did not like Ambassador Buzz, and their reasoning was Buzz can't have a beard. He's made of plastic. He doesn't age. And Jesse and I keep saying the beard is plastic. The beard is a piece that's snapped on to Buzz Lightyear's face. He's not actually an older Buzz. He is a toy that was produced to look like an older Buzz. If you want, we can have him remove the beard at one point and put it on another character, showing that it's a plastic accessory. You know, we can make it.
But they weren't even. They were literally not understanding the fact that Buzz Lightyear is meant to be a representation of a flesh and blood character in a narrative.
Mm-hmm. And so they said, no, you have to remove the beard. And we had to go back and we had to remove it in the previous issue. So now if you read 3 to 4, all of a sudden Ambassador Buzz doesn't have a beard, and you're like, where did his beard go? But the bigger problem was, you guys can't put Mr. Potato Head in Buzz Lightyear armor. And we said, why not? And they said, you just can't. We don't have, you know, like that he does. You can only portray him the way that he looks in the movie. And we're like, but Mr. Potato Head has the whole point of Potato Head is that he has interchangeable parts. And it's kind of funny because it plays into the whole thing. No, you have to remove that. So we had to go back. And for the trade, Buzz now doesn't come back rebuilt as Spud Lightyear. He just comes back as himself. Hey guys, I'm all fixed. And it's like
on a full page spread. It's
a full page splash. There's no
full page splash. It's like, boy, did we take the time to render this potato.
Mm-hmm. And if you read issue 3 in its singular form, and then you go to issue 4, it doesn't make any sense because he's just not in the Spud Lightyear armor anymore. And by the way, a month after that book came out, I was like, you have got to be effing kidding me, because what is being solicited by Hasbro? Buzz Lightyear, potato.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was ridiculous. And there was some like technical weird thing that they made us change in the 4th issue as well that made it kind of clunky. We had to they wanted us to tell it in a different way. They didn't think it was believable or something. I remember there's like a few pages that like had to get drawn or whatever last minute. Oh my goodness. It was so ridiculous. Now, you know, after that, you know, we had more like, you know, the idea was Pixar level stories for this thing. Can you tell you know, the audience what happened to us afterwards with our other pitches and what we ended up having to do with our second story arc?
I've got to wrap up pretty soon because I've got to go to bed.
Oh yeah, so me too. I figured this is where we'll end it.
We'll save it. We'll save it the later disaster, but I will touch on it. So after all this happens, I get pulled into Ross's office, and Ross tells me, this is after, was this before or after I had to cut your rate?
Oh, it was after.
Okay, so during Toy Story, I got told that we were paying Jesse too much money, and I said, well,
or actually, that's not true. I think maybe it was probably around the same time.
Okay, yeah. So on top of all that, we'll get into that. That's a whole separate issue. So we're finishing up the book. Nate is almost dead. You know, we've burned through another artist on this book, who's had to just like work his ass off to make all these corrections. The end of the book doesn't look like the beginning because Nate didn't have time to draw it, and we had to bring another artist to help him. And so the triumphant ending, like the touching ending, is not anywhere near as rendered as well as I would have liked it to really sell it. You know, to really sell the whole point of the story, because our Buzz, our bad guy Buzz, that's trying to prevent good guy Buzz from going back home and is trying to take his place. They end up in a big pitched thing where they're trying to build shelving to get out back out through the vent, and he's trying to stop them. And then all of the shelving collapses and he hits the ground and all the shelving comes down on him. And now he's damaged, like his thing's torn out and he's got a big scar down his face, you know, big like chip in his paint down his face. And he's like, all the times he's been returned. And part of the reason he's been returned is because kids are more interested in these new variants now, these new stupid variants. So the classic Buzz Lightyear that he is kept getting returned. And that's his motivation, is that he just wanted to be with a kid. He just wanted to fulfill his destiny. And now he sees himself in the reflection and he's got this big scar and his armor's damaged. And he's like, now no one's ever going to want me. I'm never going to sell. And he has like this sad moment of him just like, you know, collapsed onto his knees, just like, you know. So then, you know, we cut to the toys get back home. We cut back to the toy store. He's in the packaging, you know, damaged as he is. A kid comes in to buy a Buzz Lightyear. His mom's like, what about one of these? What about this Ninja Buzz? What about this, you know, Space Cowboy Buzz? What about Caveman Buzz? And he sees the original Buzz and he goes, wait a minute. And he picks it up and he goes, oh, this is like battle-scarred Buzz Lightyear. This is the coolest. And his mom's like, you're sure that's the one you want? And he's like, yeah, this is the only one I want. And so we get our happy ending for our bad Buzz. He gets to go off and he gets to be a toy, you know, that some kid plays with. And it's really touching, but it's just not sold very well in the art because everything got so pushed back, and Boom was just like, we don't care, put it out, it doesn't matter. And that's when I got pulled into Ross's office and he says, what are you and Jesse doing? And I said, we're trying to make a line for you that when people read it, they go, this is like Pixar level quality. And Ross goes, nobody gives an F. Like it's causing problems, just whatever. It doesn't matter what you guys do. It'll sell because it says Toy Story on the cover. You could do 22 pages. I remember distinctly what he said. He said you could do 22 pages of Buzz and Woody sitting on a street corner just having a conversation, and parents will buy it because it says Toy Story. So just do that. Stop being so goddamn ambitious.
I mean, can you believe this, guys? I mean, this is the truth of the matter. He had two people, a writer and an editor, who were saying to him, we want to make this something for you that will really last and really matter and really, you know, be something that you can hang your hat on. And he was like, fuck that shit. Give me the faster, quicker one. And this is the main sort of thinking that goes into all of like the fucking, just all comics, all been infiltrated by these corporate a-holes, you know, which is really why it's like never been better than ever, you know, the time to support indie creators. And actually, like Aaron, I think I'm going to pause it right here, and you know, we'll talk more next time about Darkwing Duck and the Muppets. So many things. There's so many other things that you've worked on, so many other things to give insight on. I mean, you know, people are saying in the comments, like, you know, this is just like how interesting, great insight, you know, it is to the process, you know, behind the scenes. I think it is. I know it is. I've been wanting to, you know, have you on and do this interview. Now that you're my co-host, I'm like, before I start bringing in other people, I need to get all of Aaron's shit out into the world, because, you know, just you've had so many interesting experiences And I really like to be able to hear what some of these are, especially in this day and age, as we switch over from like the corporate age of comics to a new independent age. It's like these stories are the stories that we need to learn from. If you're a new business out there, trying to start your own publishing company, whatever it be, it's like learn how to do this shit the right way. Don't have a promotional guy who's fucking shit talking all of your biggest names at your company every single time they walk away from the dinner table. Things to look for. Let this be a cautionary tale. So join next Sunday as we'll continue this journey with my co-host Aaron Sparrow being the interview, our interview for the show, because I really think Aaron has so much to share, and I'd love to just continue to see him share it kind of linearly. We'll hear about the Pixar stuff, the other stuff, and he went on to continue working with Disney at Joe Books, and so many other things that Aaron has worked on over the years. So I really want to get all the different things out of him, including working on some animation with our buddy Greg Weisman. But before we get out of here, Aaron, can you please share with us the photo we could have to follow that awesome comic that you got behind you, the Kneel Before Doomface?
First of all, congratulations, Gabriel, on your role. He said that he got a.
Congrats to Gabriel.
It is a main role. It's not even a supporting role. So congratulations on that. In answer to your question, the image behind me, this is drawn by the very talented Kenneth Rocafort. This is one of the covers for my upcoming book that I'm crowdfunding called Kneel Before Doomface. So this is Doomface. This is his. This is Doomface. This is his major domo Lexi. And we are going to probably be crowdfunding that at the end of June, beginning of July, depending on when everything comes together. We got a lot of really cool perks for it, a lot of really cool covers, a lot of things being done. The interior art's going to be by Renzo Rodriguez. There's going to be some backup stuff by James Silvani. We've got covers by Nathan Watson, who worked on Toy Story, and this time he got enough time to do his very best work for us. We've got
Nate's great.
Kenneth Rocafort. Might have a cover by V. Ken Marion if he's able to finish it in time. Got a lot of really great stuff. So sign up for updates at kneelbeforedoomface@gmail.com.
Kick ass. Aaron, you are Aaron_Sparrow on the Twitter. I think I am Coolest Geek JBS on Twitter. You can find me over there. So I do a podcast of this show, essentially a smaller one, just me chatting about, from a writing standpoint, all the film of geek culture stuff. Every Wednesday is Coolest Geek Alive. And then on Saturday, I do like Coolest Picks, where I review movies and TVs. Not really review. I just like sort of recommend shit. I don't really like shit talk anything unless I do that on the Wednesday show, but then I talk shit talk sort of stuff. Then Monday, I do a show called All Your Favorite Bands Suck. Again, this is just all podcast. And Fridays I do a show called Everything They Don't Want You to Know, which is basically like Freemason information and stuff like that. Anyway, I have a lot of fun doing this stuff. I do it all during the week, and then every Sunday, me and Aaron are live streaming, and maybe the midnight, somewhere within this time. I mean, we might be an hour off or an hour later. We're just working with each other's schedules based on whatever. But I too have a book that's about to launch on Kickstarter in the next 2 weeks. It's called Fucking for Our Future, and we made this amazing commercial for it. That's really it's really funny. We wrote a jingle called Big Titties, and if you'll give me a minute, I've got a commercial that I'll play you as we say our goodbyes. Aaron, want to say bye-bye?
Thanks for joining us, everybody. I hope that people who catch the replay, I hope that you enjoy all of this inside baseball and finding out exactly how awful working in comics can be.
Yeah, hell yeah. I'm so glad that it exists. I've been wanting to have this exist somewhere, some of these conversations for people who can look at it. We'll have to hashtag it appropriately so people can find all the shit. Yeah, guys, join us next week, midnight or 11, whatever we decide. And we'll see you again for another episode of Coolest Geeks, a live stream. Please enjoy our commercial for Fucking for the Future. Love you guys. See you next time. All right, here it is. Wait, I'm going to start it in.
Nobody doesn't like big titties. Say it again, but women alike love big titties. Boys, girls, and babies love big titties. Just admit that I'm right. You love big titties. Yes. Who You love big titties. Love big titties. I love big titties. I love big titties. I love big titties.
We want you for our future. Sign up for notifications now on Kickstarter.
You love big titties. Love big
Only from Blacklight District Studios.